The year is 1944. Across the battered landscapes of Europe, the clash of steel and fire echoes through ruined cities and quiet forests. The Allies are racing against time, fighting tooth and nail to bring down Hitler's war machine. But behind enemy lines, another war is being waged, not with bombs, not with bullets, but with brushstrokes, sound recordings, stagecraft, and lies. They wore army fatigues, but carried sketchbooks. They deployed at the front lines, but armed themselves with inflatable tanks, giant loudspeakers, and phony radio signals. Their job? To create the illusion of entire divisions that didn't exist, to trick the Nazis into fighting shadows. They were artists, sound engineers, set designers, and dreamers. Recruited from America's art schools, ad agencies, and Hollywood backlots. Their secret? They weren't there to kill. They were there to deceive. This is the astonishing true story of a forgotten unit. A unit so secret, their families never knew what they had done. Until decades later. They were called the Ghost Army. By 1943, the Allied command had a growing problem. German reconnaissance was everywhere. Planes circled overhead, spies monitored rail lines and roads. Wherever Allied troops moved, the Nazis noticed. And wherever the Nazis noticed, they struck. Surprise, one of war's most powerful weapons, was almost impossible. But then came an idea so bold, it bordered on insanity. What if the Allies could build a ghost, an entire phantom army, an army that looked real from the skies, sounded real to scouts on the ground, and even spoke in coded messages that the enemy could intercept? But in truth, wasn't real at all. That idea became reality, and it was called the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Just over 1,000 men, but they weren't your typical soldiers. They carried no rifles. They trained in no trenches. They weren't trained to kill, but to create illusions. Their ranks included fashion designers from Manhattan, painters from Philadelphia, sound engineers from the movie studios of Los Angeles. Among them were future legends, Bill Blass, who would later become one of America's most famous fashion icons, Ellsworth Kelly, who would shape the world of modern art. They were illustrators, sculptors, set builders, radio technicians, and Broadway designers. Recruited not for their combat skills, but for their creativity. Their job was unprecedented. Use art, sound, and trickery to make the enemy believe they were facing entire divisions, to create confusion and hesitation on a battlefield already soaked in chaos, and to do it all under strict secrecy. So secret, in fact, that most of their own families wouldn't learn what they had done until decades after the war. This was not just camouflage. This was deception on a theatrical scale. The battlefield was now a stage, and the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops were the cast, crew, and illusionists. It was a gamble, but if it worked, it could save thousands of lives. And so quietly, in the shadow of the larger war, the Ghost Army prepared to take the field. The Ghost Army was more than a clever idea. It was a fully operational deception force, divided into 4 specialized units. Each had a unique role in making illusions feel real. First, the Visual Deception Unit. Their job was to build an army that didn't exist. They created full-sized inflatable tanks, artillery, and military vehicles. So convincing that even low-flying German reconnaissance couldn't tell the difference. From the sky, a rubber Sherman tank looked just like the real thing. These weren't toys. They were military props, painted with shadows and highlights to mimic metal and weight. A field that had been empty at dawn could, by sunset, appear to be home to an entire armored division. Next, the Sonic Unit. Using enormous speakers and cutting-edge recording equipment, they played hours of battlefield sounds, tank engines revving, troops marching, trucks unloading, to simulate activity where none existed. These soundscapes were recorded by engineers working with Bell Labs and could be projected over 15 miles. The enemy didn't just see the army, they could hear it. Then came the Radio Deception Unit. This team specialized in fake radio traffic. They studied how real operators spoke, their timing, call signs, even their personalities, and mimicked them perfectly. The goal was to fool German intelligence into thinking entire divisions were transmitting from ghost locations. It was radio theater, performed live under military pressure. Finally, the special effects team. They were responsible for everything else. Fake airfields, dummy roads, rubber planes, bogus command posts with empty tents, fake mess halls and laundry lines hung with uniforms that nobody wore. They left boot prints and truck tracks to sell the illusion. Even cigarette butts and used rations were planted for authenticity. From a distance, or through a pair of binoculars, it all looked real. And the most incredible part? The Ghost Army could build an entire fake base in just 6 hours, and when night fell, they'd quietly take it all down, move it 10 miles up the road, and build it all over again. So the enemy believed the Allies were always advancing. They didn't use bullets. They used art, sound, and science. And their weapons were rubber, tape, and creativity. This was war, as illusion. The Ghost Army didn't just work from a safe distance. They operated dangerously close to the front, sometimes setting up their illusions just a few hundred yards from active German positions. They weren't spectators. They were on the razor's edge. Their job wasn't only to build fake tanks and blast sound effects. They had to play the part of soldiers convincingly and confidently. They wore the uniforms of high-ranking officers. They marched in formation. They drove jeeps into enemy-controlled towns, broadcasting fake authority with every movement. Yeah, the 6th Armored's moving east tomorrow. Big operation coming. They dropped lines like that in bars, bakeries, or public squares. Anywhere local spies might be listening. It was theater, but with deadly stakes. These weren't actors on a stage. They were performing inside a war zone. And if they were captured in disguise, with no dog tags, no weapons, and no real rank, they wouldn't be treated as prisoners of war. They would be considered spies, and under the Geneva Conventions, that meant execution. Still, they pressed on, because every fake unit they deployed meant the real Allied soldiers could move with less resistance. Every false camp they built tied down German divisions that might have been sent elsewhere. Over time, the Ghost Army executed more than 20 full-scale deception missions. Each one was crafted like a play, scripted, staged, rehearsed, and deployed in enemy territory. Some of their most daring acts included impersonating entire divisions, like the 6th Armored or the 9th Infantry, to draw German attention away from the actual front. In one operation, they simulated the presence of 30,000 troops using just 1,100 men, rubber tanks, loudspeakers, and radio lies. And the Germans bought it. They moved reinforcements away from real battle zones, stretching their defenses thin and weakening their response. The Ghost Army's success wasn't built on firepower. It was built on illusion, nerve, and precise performance under pressure. Behind enemy lines, they weren't just deceiving the Germans. They were risking their lives to protect soldiers they'd never meet and shape battles they'd never fight in directly. They were never meant to be seen, and yet their invisible hands shaped the course of the war. As the Allies pushed toward victory in late 1944, the Ghost Army faced its greatest challenge yet. Just before the infamous Battle of the Bulge, they were called upon to do the impossible again. With only 1,100 men, they had to simulate the presence of 2 full U.S. divisions, over 30,000 troops. So they rolled out the rubber tanks, broadcasted false radio transmissions, and moved their sonic units into place. Fake motor pools, inflatable artillery, stage lighting mimicking the glint of metal at dawn, and it worked. The Germans believed the deception, redirecting their forces to the wrong sector. That miscalculation gave General George Patton the opening he needed to move his real troops into position and turn the tide of the battle. Then came March 1945, the Rhine River crossing. This time, the Ghost Army didn't just fake tanks or troops, they faked an entire invasion. 10 miles south of the real crossing point, they constructed a phantom river assault. Using massive 500-pound speakers, they blasted the sound of bulldozers, pontoon bridges clanking, and trucks idling. They built dummy boats, flashed lights across the water, and flooded the airwaves with fake radio traffic. It was a masterclass in misdirection. The Germans, convinced the attack would come at the decoy location, focused their defenses there. Meanwhile, the real Allied forces crossed the Rhine, facing far less resistance than expected. The ruse had bought them time, space, and surprise. That night, a group of artists, sound engineers, and set designers won a battle without ever firing a single shot. No blood spilled, no guns raised, just creativity, courage, and a deep understanding of how to control the enemy's attention. The Ghost Army had done it again, not with weapons, but with illusion, and it helped crack open the final stretch toward victory in Europe. For decades, the Ghost Army's exploits were shrouded in secrecy. Their daring missions remained hidden in the shadows of history, classified for over 40 years. Their families never knew, their friends never understood. The world was unaware of the unsung heroes behind the greatest illusions of World War II. It wasn't until 1996 that their remarkable story began to see the light of day. That's when the first declassified documents revealed the true scope of their work. In 2013, the Ghost Army Legacy Project was established, a grassroots effort to finally give these artists, illusionists, and soldiers the recognition they deserved. And after years of hard-fought battles for justice, Congress awarded the Ghost Army the Congressional Gold Medal in 2022. Their courage wasn't conventional. Their weapon wasn't steel or bullets. It was imagination, creativity used to turn the tide of war. And though their contribution was immeasurable, it wasn't until the late 20th century that the world learned their true worth. In a war defined by force, firepower, and brutality, a small group of dreamers proved that creativity can be a weapon of war. They blurred the line between illusion and reality, and in doing so, they saved thousands of lives by doing the impossible. They were painters. They were sound designers. They were illusionists. They were the Ghost Army.